Katsukian Network presents Riffin' on Jazz with your host, Howard Robertson and Malvin Massey.
Sonny Rollins.
You got to improve, man. You got Coltrane and Ornette Coleman and these boys coming up. You better get your stuff together.
Mr. Miles Davis.
White people are funny. In America, they thought that I just woke up one morning and had the blues and started playing the trumpet. But it don't go like that, and you can't explain that to them.
Miles was able to make something that was wrong into something that was right.
Now they know. I'm not an accident.
Riffin' on Jazz.
Riffin' on Jazz. On Jazz. On Jazz. On Jazz.
Hello, and a very, very warm welcome back to Riffin' on Jazz. I'm Howard Robertson.
And I'm Malvin Massey, and Riffin' on Jazz is your weekly visit with friends talking about the music that we love.
That would be that classic African-American art form called jazz. Yeah. And what's up, Malvin Massey?
And Howard Robertson. I'm glad. I love our bowling night.
Yeah.
I like to do this.
This is a night that we get to spend together, and Malvin gets to get away from home, and he said it's like his bowling night with the fellas. Today, we've got a fantastic show. We have, again, the segment known as Kings of the Keys, Part 3, The Cool Kids.
Yeah.
The Cool Kids.
You know, from the beginning, when we were talking about doing this Kings of the Keys, the first time, we were like, okay, how are we going to include all of these cats? Because there's so many of them. So we've already gone through 12.
Yeah.
And here comes 6 more.
6 more, and we call it the Cool Kids because these are the players of cool jazz and post-bop that we had not talked about before. Some phenomenal players, Thelonius Monk we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Bill Evans. We're going to talk about AHMAD Jamal, McCOY Tyner. Marion McPartland.
Dr. Billy Taylor. And we stuck Marion in there even though she's not a king, but... No,
a queen.
She's a queen.
Oh, we're equal opportunity.
Yeah.
We are equal opportunity around here. But these are purveyors of what it was came to be known as cool jazz.
Yeah.
And it was post-bop, and you had the explanation on that.
Well, everybody, Dizzy and those guys had to go fast. They started bebop because they were running out of gigs, because Glenn Miller and those guys were taking their gigs. They started going fast. These are the cats who started bringing it back down slow, and he's easy in it down. Not slow, but bringing it down cocktail hour music.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Block chords and like that.
And we had talked about a previous purveyor of cool jazz in the form of Dave Brubeck previously. But these are some of his contemporaries and some of his friends and others who helped make it the art form that it became.
Pull it in. It's cool jazz, West Coast cool, East Coast cool.
Absolutely. And nobody did it better than perhaps one of the coolest guys ever. Thelonious Sphere Monk. Thelonious Monk, Malvin, was one of the most intriguing and interesting guys in jazz.
Yeah, and you know that track right there, how we were talking about Errol Garner and Misty, Round Midnight was one of those tracks.
Right.
Everybody has made a cover of Round Midnight.
As a matter of fact, he has the distinction of being the second most recorded jazz composer, second only to Duke Ellington. Now, let me tell you the thing about that. The thing about that is Duke Ellington wrote over 1,000 compositions. Monk wrote 70.
Yeah,
that's
but look at this
amazing.
tune, In Walk Bud. Any CD that I pick up, as they come into me as in the mail, they're straight ahead CDs.
Right.
Blue Monk.
Right.
Straight No Chaser. Ruby, My Dear.
Right.
In Walk Bud. Well, You Needn't.
And Round Midnight,
Hackensack,
which is one of the
Round
most,
Midnight.
Totally. Interesting cat. He was one of the 5 jazz musicians to have been featured on the cover of Time magazine. Yeah. That would include Louis Armstrong, Dave Brubeck, Duke Ellington, and Wynton Marsalis.
Yeah. I mean, because of his style of playing. When he Monk was the one that first started that dissonant sound,
right? But
it wasn't discord. It was he would mix his chords up. That when he'd hit that, he wouldn't hit the straight chord like it's supposed. He'd put a little dissonance in it.
And a true character. Had these bebop glasses and this beret on, and would play, but also had one of the most interesting relationships with one of the richest human beings of families on the planet.
The Baroness, the jazz Baroness. The jazz Baroness Kathleen Annie Panonica de Koningsvoort
of the Rothschild family.
Yeah.
And his son talks about this relationship and other things in an interview.
Tell me about the Baroness. She was
the Baroness Panonica de Koningsvoort.
And your family lived with her for a long time.
Yeah, let me explain. The Baroness was the granddaughter of Baron Rothschild. This is the real Rothschild, not a fake one out in the Hamptons or anything, but the real Rothschild. And she came to America in about 1955, 1956. Became very close friends with my father, along with Art Blakey, Teddy Wilson, Gigi Grice, and a number of great musicians. But the friendship that she struck up with my mother and my father became extraordinary. And I think part of it was because she felt Thelonious was the genius of all the artisans in jazz. And I think she realized early on that my mother had 2 kids, and she had this guy, Thelonious Monk, who was a real package to handle, and she and my mother became best friends. And, I never heard her say it, but I know that in the long run, she decided that she was going to help Nellie out, taking care of Thelonious. And for a long time, it was almost like I had 2 moms. And I spent a lot of time in her house out in New Jersey. Thelonious did too, because of, you have to remember,
right?
In Weehawken, New Jersey. And of course, Rudy Van Gelder's studio was in Hackensack close by. So it was an easy place to stay if you were recording in Hackensack.
This is Malvin Massey, and you're listening to Riffin' on Jazz on the Kazukian Network.
We're riffing on jazz.
I'll play the blues for you.
Blues in the Basement with Stephanie and T-Shawn.
Some great festivals going on around the tri-state area.
Got your dancing shoes?
Man, as long as I'm with you, baby, I'm always be on my toes.
Drop that zero.
Bring your blues, boo.
I got him.
We'll see you.
Let me go home.
Get set for an all-new season of Blues in the Basement, coming soon to the Kazukian Network.
We're riffing on jazz.
And welcome back to Riffin' on Jazz. Our next cool kid would be coined or described in a word, and that word would be deep to me.
Yeah, and to Miles. Too.
And to Miles. His name is Bill Evans. Yeah. Bill Evans was a tremendous keyboard player, piano player of the cool jazz ilk. And originally from Plainfield, New Jersey, And he was highly, highly regarded, particularly by Miles Davis.
Yeah. Classically trained, of course, as so many of these jazz musicians are.
Right.
Yeah, and he also was, since we mentioned these as cool kids, I'm glad you said that. They came up with the cool kids idea because, you know, Miles' CD, Birth of the Cool, and everybody talks about Miles creating the cool.
That whole genre. Cool jazz.
Bill Evans was the piano player at the time with Miles Davis. Bill Evans was the writer.
Particularly on Kinda Blue. And Kinda Blue is has been noted to be one of the most successful by some the top jazz album of all time.
Yeah.
And that has Bill Evans playing keyboards on that. He's deep. He has a concept that I thought was phenomenal. It's called the Universal Music Mind. And it talks about how people can relate to music that they aren't familiar with or hadn't heard because they have this innate sense of determining the music that they like and the music that they don't like, whether they've been familiar with it or not.
This is an instinctual skill.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And so he talks about that in one of his rare interviews.
I think that jazz very seldom in its true state is presented to the average public. They do have an idea of jazz which is not quite true. But the way I feel about it is that it is the only form of art that, in a way, America has created and given to the world in this century or in the past few centuries, let's say. But I think it's more of a revival in a different form of what went on in classical music before. In other words, in the 17th century, there was a great deal of improvisation in classical music, as you know. And because of the fact that there were no electrical recording techniques or any way to permanentize or to catch music and to record it, the music was written so that it could be permanentized that way. And so slowly but surely, the writing of the music and the interpreters of the written music gave way to more and more interpretation and more cerebral composition and less improvisation, until finally improvisation became a lost art in classical music, and we have only the composer and the interpreter. So the composer even very seldom improvised or didn't have to, say around the late 1800s or the turn of the century. But jazz, in a way, has resurrected that process, which I call the jazz process. Now, jazz, as we tend to look at it, is a style. But I feel that jazz is not so much a style as a process of making music. It's the process of making music, making 1 minute's music in 1 minute's time. Whereas when you compose, you can make 1 minute's music and take 3 months to compose 1 minute's music. Now, that's the only basic difference. Now, it so happens that because of historical circumstances and where jazz was born or whatever came up the Mississippi and American music and the American culture and all, we think of jazz as a stylistic medium now, which in a way it is. But I think we must remember that in an absolute sense, jazz is more of a certain creative process of spontaneity than a style. Therefore, you might say that Chopin or Bach or Mozart or whoever improvised music, that is, was able to make music
Bill Evans.
of the moment.
I really like that, Malvin.
Jazz.
That made a lot of sense to me in terms of that universal music mind.
Yeah.
I like that because I think that speaks back to the conversation we had initially about what the definition of jazz, what jazz is, and how some people would say, like, I don't like jazz, but I like Miles. Well, that's jazz.
Although, and then there's those people who say, well, I like jazz, I like Kenny G, but I don't like that other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't get it, that they're liking everything. They're liking the whole thing because it's all involved.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the cornucopia that jazz actually is. Yeah. But Bill Evans was, I guess he was a Renaissance man before this was popular or this cat did everything.
Yeah. You know, the thing about him playing with Miles, too, was that, like, Miles loved him, like you mentioned, that Miles loved him, and his music was instrumental in all that sound from going in. But in '59, he left Miles. '59 was around the time Miles and Train and those guys started into the avant-garde, and Evans didn't like it.
Right.
That tripped me out when I found that out.
Right. Absolutely. And again, to the point that we were talking about, left-handed, using that left hand, played a lot with his left hand.
Thick block chords.
Thick block chords and gorgeous, lush, big chords.
Yeah.
But I mean, also could do. His daddy ran a golf course, so he was a scratch golfer. He played quarterback on his fraternity's football team. He went to Southeastern Louisiana University on a flute scholarship.
Yeah, you get a piano player went on a flute scholarship.
From Plainfield, New Jersey, no less. Yeah. But ultimately became one of the key purveyors of cool jazz and post bop. And this is one of his most famous compositions coming up.
Yeah, Waltz for Debbie.
That's it. beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
And while we're talking beautiful, I mean, these guys are just can just play. I mean, they can just play. They have their own inimitable styles.
Yeah, and the jazz that they play, the style that they play, it is like, I always call it the cocktail hour sound, but it's because of, when you were looking at movies in the 50s and the 60s.
You stuck in that. There you go. There you go. In the 1960 movies.
And everybody, when they wanted to be cool, you heard this kind of smooth,
got a cocktail and a cigarette in their hand.
Yeah, and this was what you heard behind them. I love that.
The next guy, people would just evoke his name when they wanted to impress you with their coolness and knowledge of jazz. Yeah. His name is Ahmad Jamal. Yeah. Ahmad Jamal, yet another cool kid, and born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, yet another Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania classic musician.
Who was it? Earl Garner?
Earl Garner was born in Pittsburgh, and a few other folk that we talked about from Pittsburgh, including the great playwright August Wilson, who was a lot of his plays were he was from Pittsburgh. But Ahmad Jamal was a tremendous. Is a tremendous, because he is very, very much still with us.
Composer, educator, band leader, the whole works.
Totally.
And I noticed that you were very wise. You didn't do like you've been doing, using their other name.
Yeah, because somebody got sued for using his birth name.
He sued Lorraine Feather's
we used to
daddy.
say a slave name, right?
Yeah, he sued Lorraine Feather's daddy, Leonard Feathers, the critic. I think that was in 1986. He sued Leonard Feather for using his former name in a publication.
Not wanting to go there, I will not repeat the name that his mama gave him. But in the meantime, let's listen to what he had to say.
I didn't choose music, it chose me. At 3 years old, you don't make any conscious decisions like that. So music chose me, I didn't make the choice.
Subconscious?
No, just my uncle was teasing this little 3-year-old boy. I bet you can't. He was sitting at the piano. I bet you can't. I never sat down at the piano in my life at that time. I took a long time to decide. Now, I'm 3 years old. It took me a long time.
Yeah.
But in any case, he was. I bet you can't. The rest is history. I sat down and played note for note everything he played.
And he said that.
Well, he almost fainted.
Really?
And the rest of the family did too. And that's why I say music chose me. I didn't choose it. You don't make any conscious decision at 3 years old. There are a few cases like that. Earl Garner, my wonderful Pittsburgh, and possibly my biggest inspiration, he started playing at 3 too. But it doesn't happen every day. There are other instances where children start very young. But 3 years old, that's very young.
Yeah.
I love when he says that he didn't choose music. Music chose him.
Yeah, that's really cool.
He was 3 years old, as he said, and challenged by his uncle to play something, and he did it note for note.
His uncle played too, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he did it note for note. But he became immersed in the influences of like Billy Strayhorn, who was another Pittsburgh guy, Earl Hines, and Earl Gardner, who we talked about. Just a phenomenal player, and like we said, still very much around.
Yeah.
And his latest album is doing very, very well.
Yeah, that's from 2013, and it's still out there getting played.
Absolutely, with an iconic song that I heard one of your announcers play.
Yeah.
And I had to rush down and download. I almost said rush out and get it to the record store, but that doesn't exist anymore. Let's go to Saturday Morning.
We're riffing on jazz.
Rolling down the street with my radio on, listen to Funky Politics.
The mayor of the city of Memphis, Mayor Jim Strickland. How are you, sir?
Fantastic.
We keep it real, we keep it right, and we keep it funky.
Get set for an all-new season of Funky Politics. Coming soon to the Kazukian Network.
R&R on sports. Artivism. Best in blue. Funky politics. Blues in the basement. Neighborhood Connect. Riffin' on jazz. On the Kazukian Network.
We're riffing on jazz.
Back to Riffing on Jazz. Now, Malvin, we go back to the state of Pennsylvania. But this time, it's the other side of the state. We go to Philadelphia. You know what they say about Pennsylvania, right? They said you got Pittsburgh on one end, you got Philly on the other end, and you got Alabama in between.
And Billy was from there too. Speaking of people, Billie Holiday was from Philly.
From Philly as well. Other end of the state, and we are talking about Alfred McCoy Tyner.
Yeah,
McCoy Tyner, fantastic musician.
One of the slickest piano players ever, as far as gigging. You were at the GPAC when he came to Memphis. That set was so laid back, nobody's talked. When he started playing, and it was so cool, he walks out on the stage, he pulls back the seat, he sits down, and he starts to play. And he plays until he's finished, and he gets up and he leaves.
Right.
Whoa,
right.
And nobody said a word.
He, is most notably known as John Coltrane's piano player. Yeah. Featured on My Favorite Things. Some of Coltrane's seminal recordings.
Yeah, the main things
include McCoy Tyner, and associated with Train, associated with Joe Henderson, Freddie Hubbard, Wayne Shorter. Just tremendous career. Stanley Turrentine, and has had a tremendous career.
Yeah, still gigging.
Still playing. Yeah. Still playing.
takes forever, I will wait for you. That's off that Prelude and Sonata CD. That's probably one of my favorite things that McCoy Tyner has ever played. I love the song. I love his rendition of it. That was great.
Right. I love how smooth you are with that back announcement.
Right.
One day I'm going to learn. Now we mix in among the cool kids, among the kings of the keys, a queen of the keys. Native Brit.
Yeah.
Her name is Marion McPartland. And she is. This is the funny part of that. Her growing up, she studied at Miss Hammond's School for Young Children, and as well as the Guildhall School of Music and other places. But much to her family's chagrin, she developed a love for American jazz artists like Duke Ellington and Fats Waller and Teddy Wilson. After all that good education and good classical training, she wanted to play some Fats Waller.
Right on, and did it.
And did it, absolutely, as we will hear. That was Marion McPartland.
Yeah.
And you know, it is probably as sexist as it can be, but one of the highest compliments about a female pianist, jazz pianist, is that she doesn't play like a girl.
Yeah, exactly.
And she absolutely doesn't. She is, and was a jazz aficionado and professional. Lived to be 95 years old and did a show. I think
she had
on
a radio
NPR,
show.
Had an NPR.
It lasted forever, for a very long time. Phineas was a guest on there.
Okay.
Everyone booked him over
She
there.
got him to talk.
Well, it was embarrassing, but I won't talk that. I won't go into that. Yes.
Oh, wow.
You know, Phineas, he had his thing. Marion also was, she fell one time. She was supposed to be coming here, and she fell and hurt her hip, and she couldn't get around. And word got out, and she got mad because people, she didn't want people talking about that.
Right, right.
Because she didn't want to miss out on any gigs. And she was back around gigging in a little while.
And speaking of another professor, if you will, of jazz, that brings us to Dr. Billy Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
One of not only a phenomenal player and keyboard pianist, jazz pianist, but a most astute
broadcaster, educator.
Absolutely.
The whole works. He was the jazz educator of jazz educators.
Used to do a segment on CBS Sunday Morning. For those of you fans who are fans of the show, he did the jazz segment and interviewed everybody.
And it came from them interviewing him.
Totally.
They interviewed him, and then one of those producers said, hey, that'd be a good idea to let him do a jazz segment.
Absolutely. I think it's a good idea to let him play some music.
Yeah.
Billy Taylor. And Malvin, the thing I love about Billy Taylor is that although he was a professional musician, he could always break it down. You know, that universal music mind that Bill Evans was talking about, he could always make it plain and break it down to its least common denominator where a layman could understand what's going on.
He was really an educator all along.
Totally, and this is how he did it relative to improvisation.
People that I know who are jazz artists always say, you know what bothers me? It is this notion that all we do is improvise, and nobody tends to appreciate, you know, that the serious sense of structure that's there, and how much work goes into creating that. What are the cliches that
Well,
that are overworked?
one of the major cliches is that it just the muse strikes, bang. I mean, lightning comes down, and you all of a sudden you can just, ideas flow. Well,
that is
they
one great
flow-
jam session.
Yeah, right. But they come if you, as Charlie Parker and other great artists have done, if you've prepared yourself. It's the same as someone who's an excellent speaker. In order to communicate with words, that person has to know how to put those words together, not just in sentences, but in meaningful phrases that will capture some image or make you or me feel something. This is what great jazz musicians do. And in doing that, they take all of the elements of the music. I mean, I sometimes take my own music when I demonstrate this to people who are not musicians.
Dr. Billy Taylor. And that other voice that everybody heard, tell them who that was.
Charlie Rose.
A young Charlie Rose.
Charlie Rose, yeah. Yeah. You know, Billy Taylor was like so many other cats. He played different instruments. He played the guitar, he played the drums, he played the saxophone. He liked piano the best. Family was musical people. He grew up in D.C.
D.C. area, okay.
Came from Carolina, North Carolina, from Greenville, North Carolina.
Right.
You know, and he took classical piano lessons with Henry Grant. This was a cat who had taught Duke Ellington.
Okay.
You know, imagine that. A generation earlier.
Oh, my goodness. I love the relationships. I love the connections. The connections that we see between, in terms of, it could be something as simple as influences, but I love those kind of connections. The other thing that he was versatile. He could play gospel, too.
Oh, yeah.
Just like he was raised in the Greater Triple Rock Missionary Baptist Church. He wrote, "I Wish I Knew How It Felt to Be Free," that made popular by Nina Simone. to Riffin' on Jazz.
Yeah. Make you think about what just before that. Make you think about Nina Simone.
Totally. It's good to know who writes and who wrote some of these songs, some of this music that we have heard all our lives and whatnot, and who knew that that was Billy Taylor. Kings of the Keys, Part 3. The Cool Kids. It's been fantastic. We've had an opportunity to talk about a lot of players, quite a few players that we had never talked about before.
And maybe we ought to break it. I don't know. We could do a segment 4 because there are so many still going on. This guy's even right now. It's guys like Cyrus Chestnut, Joe McBride.
Absolutely. Why not?
There's all these young guys that are coming around now because these cats are still, even though a couple of them are still gigging, these cats are getting on up in age. And there are some cats who have started a whole new movement of music going on right now, and I think we need to talk about them some too.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's no limit to what we can do. I mean, that's the cool thing about doing this thing, man.
I know.
It's wide open. We can do, and we're old enough. I mean, people know that we ain't supposed to be wrapped real tight at this age and stage of life, so we can do anything we want to do.
As long as it stays within the FCC guidelines, anyway.
Yes, as long as we don't cuss. But THELONIUS Monk, Bill Evans, Ahmad Jamal, McCOY Tyner, Marion McPartland, and Billy Taylor, the Cool Kids. And we're going to go out with a standard, that, most everybody has heard. A lot of people don't know the name of it. The name of it is Poinciana. And it is one of the classic jazz standards. And my friend, it has been fantastic being with you again here on Riffin' on Jazz.
Oh, it's always a blast, Howard. It's always a blast, man.
We really want you to be regular listeners of Riffin' on Jazz. So why not go to Facebook and check us out there?
Yeah, and you can also use your audio-on-demand devices, podcast provider, and you can check us out on Kazukian Network.
Tell everybody you know we're Riffin' on Jazz.
Yeah.
Riffin' on Jazz. Executive produced by Kazukian. Co-host by Howard Robertson and Malvin Massey Jr. Music curation by Howard and Malvin. And recorded at Kazukian Studios. Riffin' on Jazz. Part of the Kazukian Network.